The thunderstorm over Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport had been raging for 3 hours, creating chaos that rippled through the entire aviation system and stranding thousands of passengers in what had become an increasingly tense and crowded terminal. Flight delays cascaded like dominoes, with departures pushed back hour after hour as meteorologists tracked the massive storm system that showed no signs of moving through the area anytime soon. Lightning illuminated the darkened sky in brilliant flashes that briefly revealed the extent of the weather system stretching across northern Texas, while thunder rolled continuously overhead, shaking the massive terminal building and adding to the anxiety of already frustrated travelers. The airport's public address system crackled constantly with announcements of additional delays, gate changes, and cancellations that left travelers frustrated, exhausted, and searching for any available space to wait out the weather. The main terminal had become a refugee camp of sorts, with people camped out on every available chair, bench, and floor space, surrounded by luggage, laptops, and the detritus of extended, unexpected stays in an environment designed for brief transitions rather than prolonged occupancy. Clint Black sat quietly in the corner of the Admiral's Club Lounge, a first-class passenger facility that provided some refuge from the chaos of the main terminal, but was now packed beyond its normal capacity, with displaced travelers seeking comfort and Wi-Fi access. The exclusive lounge, normally a haven of quiet sophistication where business travelers could work and relax in relative peace, had been transformed into an overcrowded waiting room where stressed passengers competed for electrical outlets, comfortable seating, and the attention of overwhelmed staff members trying to manage a situation that had spiraled far beyond their normal operational parameters. At 35 years old, Clint had spent the better part of the past decade establishing himself as one of country music's most successful and respected artists, with a string of #1 hits and platinum albums that had made him a household name throughout America and beyond. His rise to fame had been meteoric but well-deserved, built on a foundation of exceptional songwriting ability, a distinctive vocal style, and an authentic connection to the traditional values and musical heritage that defined country music at its best. His trademark black cowboy hat rested on the small table beside his comfortable leather chair, a signature piece that had become as much a part of his identity as his distinctive baritone voice and his remarkable ability to craft songs that spoke directly to the everyday experiences of working-class Americans. The hat was a genuine piece of Western wear, not a costume or affectation, reflecting his authentic connection to the cowboy culture and rural American values that had shaped both his personal identity and his musical career. Without the hat and dressed in simple jeans, a well-worn button-down shirt, and scuffed leather boots that showed the signs of extensive use on tour buses and concert stages, he looked like any other tired traveler trying to make the best of an increasingly frustrating situation. His casual appearance allowed him a degree of anonymity that was increasingly rare for someone of his celebrity status, giving him the opportunity to observe and interact with the world around him without the constant attention and expectations that usually accompanied his public appearances. The past few months had been particularly challenging for Clint, both professionally and personally, as he navigated the complex and often contradictory demands of maintaining artistic integrity while achieving commercial success in an industry that was undergoing rapid and fundamental changes. The country music business in the mid-1990s was experiencing one of its periodic upheavals, with record labels pushing increasingly hard for more pop-influenced sounds and radio programmers becoming more conservative in their playlists, focusing almost exclusively on younger artists who could appeal to the coveted 18 to 34 demographic that advertisers valued most highly. This demographic shift was not just about age, but about cultural sophistication and crossover potential. Record executives were increasingly interested in artists who could transcend the traditional boundaries of country music and achieve success on pop radio, in urban markets, and with audiences who might not typically consider themselves country music fans. This pressure for crossover appeal often came at the expense of the authentic rural and working-class themes that had traditionally defined country music, and made it such a powerful voice for Americans who felt excluded from mainstream popular culture. His most recent album, while critically acclaimed by music journalists who appreciated his commitment to traditional country values and musical craftsmanship, had not achieved the commercial success that his label executives had hoped for and expected. The album represented some of his most personal and artistically mature work, featuring songs that explored themes of love, loss, family, and the changing nature of American rural life, with a depth and sophistication that reflected his growth as both a songwriter and a human being. However, The commercial disappointment of the album had led to increasingly uncomfortable conversations with record label executives about his future direction and market viability. These executives, mostly younger men and women with business degrees and marketing backgrounds, rather than deep knowledge of country music history and traditions, spoke in terms of market research, focus group testing, and demographic analysis rather than artistic vision or cultural authenticity. The pressure was intensified by the fact that country music in the mid-1990s was experiencing an unprecedented boom period, with new artists achieving crossover success that previous generations of country performers could never have imagined. Artists like Garth Brooks and Shania Twain were selling millions of albums to audiences that extended far beyond traditional country music demographics, proving that country-influenced music could achieve mainstream commercial success if it was packaged and marketed correctly. In this environment, artists who were perceived as too traditional or too closely tied to country music's rural roots often found themselves struggling to maintain their relevance and commercial appeal. The industry's focus on youth and crossover potential created a situation where established artists with loyal fan bases could suddenly find themselves marginalized if their music didn't fit the current commercial formula or demographic targeting strategies. Adding to his professional concerns were personal challenges that had been weighing heavily on his mind during the long flight from Los Angeles, where he had spent several days in meetings with his management team and record label executives about his next career moves. These meetings had been frustrating and sometimes contentious, with business executives who seemed to have little understanding of or respect for country music's cultural significance, pushing him to change his musical style and artistic approach in ways that felt fundamentally dishonest to his core values and artistic vision. His marriage to actress Lisa Hartman had brought him tremendous personal happiness and emotional stability, providing him with a loving partnership that helped him navigate the pressures and challenges of his high-profile career. Lisa was not just a beautiful and talented actress, but an intelligent and supportive partner who understood the unique pressures of entertainment industry success and the importance of maintaining authentic personal relationships in an environment where superficiality and opportunism were often the norm. However, their relationship had also subjected both of them to intense media scrutiny and criticism from some quarters of the country music community, who questioned whether his marriage to a Hollywood actress was compatible with his image as an authentic country artist. Some critics and fans seemed to believe that marrying someone from outside the country music world somehow compromised his credibility, or suggested that he was abandoning his roots in pursuit of broader mainstream acceptance. This criticism was particularly frustrating because it reflected the kind of narrow-minded thinking that often plagued discussions about country music and its relationship to broader American culture. The suggestion that a country artist could only maintain authenticity by limiting their personal relationships to people within the country music community struck Clint as both illogical and ultimately harmful to the genre's long-term growth and cultural relevance. The lounge around him buzzed with the kind of restless energy that comes from people who are accustomed to being in control of their schedules and situations suddenly finding themselves at the mercy of forces completely beyond their influence or control. Business executives spoke loudly into their cell phones, trying to rearrange important meetings, conference calls, and business presentations that had been disrupted by the weather delays. Their conversations revealed the high-stakes nature of their professional lives and the significant financial and career consequences that could result from missing important appointments and deadlines. Families with young children struggled to keep their kids entertained and calm while dealing with their own stress and uncertainty about when they might finally reach their destinations. The confined space of the airport lounge was not designed for extended occupancy by families, and the combination of bored children and anxious parents created additional tension in an already stressful environment. At a table near the large windows that offered a dramatic view of the storm-lashed tarmac, where ground crews worked in rain gear to secure aircraft and equipment against the powerful winds, a group of well-dressed professionals were engaged in an increasingly animated conversation about various topics related to business, politics, and culture. The group consisted of what appeared to be successful business executives, corporate lawyers, and management consultants, all dressed in expensive suits and carrying the kind of high-end luggage, electronic devices, and accessories that marked them as members of the professional elite who regularly traveled between major American cities for business purposes. Their conversation, which had started as a typical discussion of flight delays and business inconveniences, had gradually evolved into a broader and more philosophical critique of American culture and what they perceived as the declining quality and increasing commercialization of popular entertainment. They spoke with the confidence and authority of people who were accustomed to having their opinions taken seriously, and who viewed themselves as sophisticated arbiters of good taste and cultural refinement. The discussion had somehow meandered from complaints about airline service and airport facilities to observations about television programming, movie quality, and eventually to a wholesale condemnation of what they saw as the lowest common denominator tendencies in American popular culture. Their comments revealed a worldview that divided American society into sophisticated urban professionals like themselves and a vast mass of less educated, less cultured people who consumed inferior forms of entertainment and cultural expression. The topic had somehow shifted specifically to country music, and their comments were becoming increasingly disparaging and dismissive, reflecting cultural prejudices that were unfortunately common among certain segments of American society. They spoke about the genre as if it were a form of cultural pollution that appealed only to uneducated rural populations who lacked the sophistication to appreciate more refined forms of artistic expression. Their observations were delivered with the kind of casual cruelty and intellectual arrogance that comes from people who assume that their targets are not present and cannot hear their words, and who believe that their educational and professional credentials give them the right to make sweeping judgments about entire communities and cultural traditions. The conversation revealed not just personal taste preferences, but deep-seated class prejudices that treated country music and its audience as inherently inferior to more urbane forms of cultural expression. One of the men, a distinguished silver-haired executive in his 50s, whose expensive Swiss watch, perfectly tailored suit, and Italian leather shoes suggested significant wealth and professional success, was holding forth with particular venom about what he characterized as the simplistic and intellectually backward nature of country music and its performers. His voice carried the kind of natural authority that comes from years of making important business decisions and having those decisions accepted without question by subordinates, colleagues, and business partners. He spoke about country music artists as if they were curiosities from a bygone era, relics of a less sophisticated and enlightened time that educated cosmopolitan Americans had supposedly outgrown through education, travel, and exposure to more refined cultural influences. His comments reflected the kind of cultural superiority complex that was unfortunately common among certain segments of American society who viewed rural and working-class culture as inherently inferior to their own metropolitan sophistication. The executive's monologue revealed a worldview that saw American society as divided between enlightened urban professionals who appreciated sophisticated forms of art and culture, and a backward rural population that clung to outdated and primitive forms of entertainment. This perspective ignored the rich cultural heritage and artistic sophistication of country music, while revealing the speaker's own cultural narrow-mindedness and intellectual limitations. The conversation continued for several minutes, with various members of the group contributing their own observations about what they saw as the intellectual and artistic limitations of country music and its audience. Their words revealed not just ignorance about the musical genre they were criticizing, but a broader contempt for the Americans who found meaning and value in country music's themes and artistic expressions. They spoke about country music fans as if they were a separate and inferior class of Americans, people whose cultural preferences revealed their lack of education, sophistication, and intellectual development. This characterization ignored the diversity of country music's audience, which included people from all educational and economic backgrounds who appreciated the genre's emphasis on storytelling, emotional honesty, and connection to traditional American values. As Clint listened to their conversation from his corner table, he felt a familiar mix of frustration, sadness, and anger that he had experienced many times throughout his career when confronted with such attitudes. The criticisms and cultural prejudices being expressed were not new to him. He had encountered similar attitudes from music critics, industry executives, and cultural commentators who seemed to believe that country music was inherently less worthy of respect than other musical genres. The prejudice was particularly frustrating because it was based on stereotypes and misconceptions rather than genuine knowledge or understanding of country music as an art form. Most of the people who expressed such dismissive attitudes had never made any serious effort to understand country music's rich history, its sophisticated songwriting traditions, or its important role in preserving and expressing authentic American cultural values. What made this particular situation more difficult and personally painful was the casual, dismissive nature of their comments and the clear assumption that everyone in their vicinity would share their cultural prejudices and class-based superiority complex. They spoke as if the very existence of country music and its artists was somehow an embarrassment to American culture, something that sophisticated people should apologize for, rather than celebrate or even acknowledge as legitimate artistic expression. The silver-haired executive, apparently emboldened by the apparent agreement of his companions, and perhaps by the alcohol he had been consuming during the long weather delay, began to speak more loudly and with increasing vitriol about specific country music artists. He mentioned several names with particular disdain and contempt, describing them as representatives of everything that was wrong with American popular culture and intellectual life. His voice carried across the crowded lounge as he spoke about these artists as if they were personal affronts to his sensibilities and intelligence, people whose very existence somehow diminished the cultural quality and intellectual sophistication of American society. The other passengers in the lounge began to take notice of the conversation, with some looking visibly uncomfortable at the harsh tone and personal nature of the attacks, while others seemed to be enjoying the entertainment value of the increasingly animated and contentious discussion. The executive's critique went beyond simple musical preferences to include personal attacks on the character, intelligence, and cultural value of country music artists. He spoke about them as if they were somehow responsible for maintaining what he saw as backward and regressive attitudes in American society, as if their music prevented social progress and intellectual development. When the executive's monologue reached Clint's name specifically, the words cut through the ambient noise of the crowded lounge like a sharp blade, striking him with unexpected force and creating a moment of profound personal and professional crisis. The man spoke with particular contempt about what he called Clint's pretensions to authenticity and his appeal to what he described as the most backward and uneducated segments of American society. His description was not just professionally dismissive but personally cruel and demeaning, attacking not just Clint's music, but his character, intelligence, and worth as a human being. The executive spoke as if Clint's very existence was somehow offensive to people of refined taste and cultural sophistication, as if his success represented a failure of American educational and cultural institutions. The attack escalated dramatically when another member of the group, apparently encouraged by the laughter and enthusiastic agreement of his companions, added his own commentary about country music artists being cultural trash that polluted the American entertainment landscape and lowered the overall quality of the nation's artistic and intellectual life. The word trash was delivered with particular venom and contempt, as if the very existence of artists like Clint was somehow offensive to people who considered themselves culturally sophisticated and intellectually superior. The comment hung in the air of the crowded lounge like a toxic cloud, creating a moment of uncomfortable silence as other passengers processed what they had just heard and tried to determine how to respond to such a harsh and personal attack. Some looked genuinely shocked at the casual cruelty of the remark, while others seemed uncomfortable with the level of vitriol and personal hatred that had been expressed about people who were, after all, fellow Americans who had achieved significant success in their chosen field. The use of the word trash was particularly painful because it reduced Clint and other country music artists to the level of refuse, something to be discarded and forgotten rather than respected as human beings with feelings, dignity, and artistic accomplishments. The dehumanizing nature of the comment revealed the depth of cultural prejudice and class-based hatred that motivated the speaker's attitudes. Clint felt the words hit him with unexpected force and emotional impact, despite having heard similar criticisms and cultural attacks many times throughout his career from various sources. There was something particularly painful about being called trash by someone who knew nothing about him personally, who had made no effort to understand his background, his struggles, his artistic development, or his genuine commitment to his craft and his audience. The personal nature of the attack, combined with the public setting and the casual assumption that such views were universally shared among sophisticated people, created a perfect storm of hurt, anger, and professional humiliation that threatened to overwhelm his usual composure and emotional self-control. He had spent years developing thick skin against criticism and learning to focus on the positive responses from fans who found meaning and value in his music. But this moment seemed to crystallize all of his frustrations about cultural prejudice and class-based discrimination. The attack felt particularly unfair because it was based not on any genuine knowledge of his work or character, but on stereotypes and prejudices about country music and its practitioners. The executives were attacking not the real Clint Black, but a caricature created by their own cultural biases and intellectual limitations. For several long moments, Clint remained in his seat, wrestling with conflicting impulses about how to respond to such a direct and personal attack delivered in such a public setting. Part of him wanted to simply ignore the comments and continue with his quiet wait for the storm to pass, maintaining the anonymity that had allowed him to overhear the conversation in the first place, and avoiding any potential confrontation that might escalate the situation. Another part of him felt a deep responsibility to defend not just himself, but all the artists and fans who were being dismissed and denigrated by people who clearly knew nothing about the musical tradition they were so casually attacking and destroying with their words. He thought about the thousands of fans who had found comfort, inspiration, and meaning in country music, and how they would feel if they could hear the contempt and hatred being expressed about their cultural preferences and artistic choices. He also considered his responsibility as a public figure and successful artist to stand up for the values and traditions that had made his career possible. Country music had given him not just professional success, but a sense of purpose and connection to important American cultural traditions. To remain silent in the face of such attacks might seem like acceptance or even agreement with the prejudices being expressed. The executive continued his monologue, apparently unaware that his words had created any discomfort among his fellow passengers, or that anyone might object to his characterization of an entire musical genre and the people who created and enjoyed it. His confidence seemed to grow with each disparaging comment, as if the lack of immediate contradiction proved that his views were widely shared and socially acceptable among educated, sophisticated Americans. The man's voice grew louder and more animated as he expanded his critique to include not just country music, but the entire cultural and political worldview that he associated with the genre and its audience. His comments revealed deep-seated prejudices about rural Americans, working-class people, and anyone who didn't share his urban, professional, cosmopolitan perspective on life and culture. As Clint sat there processing the attack and deciding how to respond, he became increasingly aware that other passengers in the lounge were beginning to look in his direction with recognition and concern. Some seemed to recognize him despite his casual dress and the absence of his signature hat, while others appeared to be waiting to see if anyone would challenge the harsh words that had been spoken about an entire musical tradition and the people who practiced it. Several passengers looked uncomfortable with the level of vitriol and personal hatred that was being expressed, and seemed to be hoping that someone would intervene to restore civility to the conversation. The atmosphere in the lounge had become tense and unpleasant, with the executive's attacks creating an environment of cultural hostility that made everyone uncomfortable. The moment stretched on, filled with tension and possibility, as if the entire lounge was holding its breath waiting to see what would happen next. The storm outside continued to rage with undiminished fury, trapping everyone in this confined space where personal prejudices and cultural conflicts could no longer be avoided or ignored through physical separation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of internal debate and emotional processing, Clint made his decision. He stood up slowly and deliberately, his movement causing several nearby passengers to look up from their phones, magazines, and laptops. His posture was calm and dignified, showing no signs of anger, aggression, or emotional volatility. But there was something about his presence and bearing that commanded attention and suggested that something significant was about to happen. He walked across the lounge toward the group of executives with measured, confident steps, his worn leather boots making soft sounds on the carpeted floor. As he approached their table, the animated conversation gradually died away as the participants became aware that someone was approaching them with apparent purpose and determination. When he reached their table, Clint stopped and stood quietly for a moment, allowing the men to look up at him and register his presence. His expression was calm and thoughtful, showing no trace of the anger, hurt, or humiliation that he had felt when listening to their comments. Instead, he projected the kind of quiet confidence and inner strength that comes from someone who is completely comfortable with who he is and what he represents. The silver-haired executive who had been leading the attack looked up with obvious irritation at having his monologue interrupted by a stranger. His expression suggested that he was prepared to dismiss this intrusion and return to his conversation. But something about Clint's presence and demeanor seemed to give him pause and make him reconsider his initial reaction. When Clint finally spoke, his voice was calm, clear, and carried the distinctive accent and cadence that had made him one of country music's most recognizable and beloved vocalists. He began by introducing himself with simple dignity, stating his name clearly, and acknowledging that he had overheard their conversation about country music and its artists. The reaction from the group was immediate and dramatic. The executive who had been speaking most harshly about country music suddenly looked as if he had been struck by lightning, his face flushing red with embarrassment and what appeared to be genuine fear about the consequences of his words. The other members of the group exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly realizing that they had been caught making cruel and ignorant comments about someone who was actually present to hear them. The silence that followed was deafening, as the executives processed the full implications of what had just happened. They had been attacking a successful, accomplished artist to his face, revealing their own ignorance and prejudice in the most embarrassing way possible. But instead of delivering the angry confrontation that the executives clearly expected and probably deserved, Clint surprised everyone in the lounge by taking a completely different approach. His response was measured, thoughtful, and demonstrated the kind of grace under pressure that transforms difficult situations into opportunities for education and understanding. He began by acknowledging that he understood their perspective, and that he had encountered similar attitudes many times throughout his career. He spoke about the cultural prejudices that often divide Americans based on geography, education, and social class, and how these divisions prevent people from appreciating the diversity and richness of American artistic expression. Rather than defending himself personally or attacking the executives for their ignorance and cruelty, Clint used the moment as an opportunity to educate them about country music as an art form and cultural tradition. He spoke about the genre's deep roots in American history, its connection to the experiences of working-class Americans, and its role in preserving important stories and values that might otherwise be lost in an increasingly homogenized culture. His words were delivered without anger or defensiveness, but with the kind of quiet authority that comes from someone who has spent years thinking deeply about their craft and its place in American society. He spoke about the technical skill required to write and perform country music well, the emotional honesty that the genre demands from its practitioners, and the genuine connection that exists between country artists and their audiences. He explained how country music served as a voice for Americans who often felt excluded from mainstream popular culture, providing them with songs that reflected their values, struggles, and aspirations. He talked about the genre's role in preserving important American stories and cultural traditions that connected people to their heritage and sense of identity. As he spoke, other passengers in the lounge began to move closer, drawn by the unexpected eloquence and dignity of his response to what had been a moment of potential conflict. His words seemed to transform the atmosphere in the room, turning what could have been an ugly confrontation into something resembling a masterclass in cultural understanding and human decency. He shared personal stories about his own background and the experiences that had shaped his music, painting a picture of country music as a sophisticated and meaningful art form that reflected the real lives and struggles of millions of Americans. His description of the songwriting process, the collaborative nature of country music production, and the deep respect that existed within the Nashville community for musical craftsmanship challenged every stereotype that the executives had been promoting. When he finished speaking about the artistic merits of country music, Clint shifted to addressing the broader issue of cultural prejudice and the harm that comes from dismissing entire groups of people based on limited understanding and class-based assumptions. His words were gentle but firm, challenging the executives to consider the impact of their attitudes not just on individual artists, but on the broader American cultural conversation. He spoke about the importance of keeping an open mind when encountering unfamiliar artistic expressions and the value of trying to understand different perspectives rather than simply dismissing them as inferior. His message was one of inclusion and respect, suggesting that American culture was strengthened rather than weakened by its diversity, and that sophistication should be measured not by one's ability to exclude and criticize, but by one's capacity to appreciate and learn from different forms of human expression. The response from the other passengers in the lounge was immediate and overwhelming. What had started as a small group listening to an unexpected speech had grown into virtually everyone in the crowded space, and they began to applaud spontaneously as Clint concluded his remarks. The applause was not just polite acknowledgement, but genuine appreciation for the grace and wisdom he had shown in transforming a moment of conflict into an opportunity for education and understanding. The sound filled the lounge and seemed to release the tension that had been building since the harsh comments had first been made. The executives who had been making the disparaging comments looked mortified by the entire situation. The silver-haired man who had called country music artists trash appeared to be struggling with genuine shame and remorse as he realized the full impact of his words and the character of the person he had been attacking. Several of the executives approached Clint personally to apologize for their comments and to thank him for his gracious response to their ignorance and cruelty. They admitted that they had been speaking from prejudice rather than knowledge, and that his explanation had opened their eyes to aspects of country music and American culture that they had never considered. The lead executive, still visibly shaken by the encounter, offered a particularly heartfelt apology and confessed that he had never actually listened seriously to country music or made any effort to understand its artistic merits. He asked for recommendations about where he might begin to educate himself about the genre and its history, showing a genuine desire to learn from his mistake. Other passengers continued to approach Clint throughout the remainder of the flight delay, sharing their own stories about how country music had touched their lives and expressing their appreciation for the dignity and wisdom he had shown in handling such a difficult situation. Many mentioned that they would never forget the lesson they had witnessed about responding to ignorance with education and to cruelty with kindness. The story of what happened in the Admirals Club that day spread quickly through both the country music community and the broader entertainment industry, becoming a legend that inspired countless other artists and public figures who faced similar challenges with cultural prejudice and personal attacks. For Clint himself, the experience reinforced his commitment to using his platform and visibility to promote understanding and respect between different groups of Americans, and reminded him that his role as a country music artist extended far beyond entertainment to include education and cultural ambassadorship. The airline staff working in the lounge also expressed their admiration for how Clint had handled the situation with such remarkable grace and professionalism. Several veteran flight attendants and customer service representatives mentioned that they dealt with conflicts between passengers on a regular basis, but they had never witnessed someone transform such a potentially explosive and embarrassing situation into something positive, educational, and ultimately healing for everyone involved. The lounge manager, a woman who had worked in the airline industry for over 20 years and had seen every conceivable type of passenger behavior, approached Clint personally to thank him for the way he had handled the confrontation. She mentioned that the incident would become part of the training materials that the airline used to teach customer service representatives how to deal with difficult situations, serving as an example of how conflict could be resolved through dignity, education, and mutual respect, rather than anger and retaliation. When flights finally began to resume as the storm system moved through the area and conditions improved enough for safe aircraft operations, Clint found himself surrounded by new friends and admirers who had been deeply touched by his example of grace under pressure and his commitment to building bridges between different communities and cultural perspectives. The executives who had initially attacked him were among the most effusive in their praise, still clearly processing the profound lesson they had learned about judging people and cultural expressions based on limited understanding and class prejudice. The lead executive, whose harsh words had started the entire confrontation, took the initiative to approach Clint one final time before his departure gate was called. He carried with him a business card and a handwritten note expressing his genuine remorse for his earlier comments and his gratitude for the education he had received. He mentioned that he planned to begin exploring country music seriously for the first time in his life, and asked if Clint could recommend some essential albums and artists that would help him understand the genre's depth and cultural significance. Clint graciously provided several recommendations, focusing on classic artists like Hank Williams, Patsy Cline, and Johnny Cash, as well as contemporary performers who represented the best of modern country music's storytelling tradition and musical craftsmanship. He also suggested some books and documentaries that would help the executive understand country music's historical development and its role in American cultural history. The conversation between Clint and the executive continued for several minutes, drawing the attention of other passengers who were impressed by the genuine nature of the apology and the gracious way that Clint continued to respond with patience and educational generosity rather than any trace of resentment or vindictiveness. The transformation in the executive's attitude was remarkable to witness, as he moved from casual cruelty to genuine curiosity and respect. Other passengers who had witnessed the entire incident also approached Clint to share their own thoughts and experiences related to cultural prejudice and the power of music to bridge differences between people from different backgrounds. Many mentioned that they had learned important lessons about keeping an open mind and showing respect for artistic expressions that might fall outside their personal comfort zones or cultural preferences. A retired school teacher who had been sitting nearby during the confrontation told Clint that she planned to use the story in her volunteer work with literacy programs, as an example of how education and respectful dialogue could overcome prejudice and misunderstanding. She mentioned that the incident had reminded her of the importance of challenging stereotypes and encouraging people to explore cultural expressions beyond their immediate experience. A young business traveler who had been observing the situation shared that he had grown up in a household where country music was dismissed and mocked, but that witnessing Clint's dignified response and articulate defense of the genre had inspired him to reconsider his own cultural assumptions. He asked for music recommendations and expressed genuine interest in learning more about country music's artistic traditions and cultural significance. The story of what happened in the Admirals Club that day began to spread immediately through social media and word-of-mouth communication, as passengers shared their experiences and observations about the remarkable demonstration of grace under pressure they had witnessed. The incident quickly gained traction on social networking platforms, with people sharing accounts of the confrontation and praising Clint's response as an example of how public figures should handle personal attacks and cultural prejudice. Music industry publications picked up the story within days, with seasoned journalists and critics writing lengthy articles about the incident and its broader implications for discussions about cultural respect and artistic integrity. The story was used as a case study in how individual actions could contribute to broader cultural understanding and healing, and how responding to ignorance with education rather than anger could create lasting positive change in attitudes and relationships. Country music radio stations across the nation began featuring the story as part of their programming, with disc jockeys and program directors using the incident as an opportunity to discuss the importance of defending country music's cultural legitimacy and artistic merit. Many stations organized special programming segments that featured in-depth discussions about country music's history, its role in American culture, and the unfair stereotypes that often prevented people from appreciating the genre's sophistication and cultural value. The Country Music Association and other industry organizations also recognized the significance of the incident, with several executives publicly praising Clint's handling of the situation and suggesting that it represented the kind of cultural ambassadorship that could help break down barriers between country music and other communities. The incident became part of industry discussions about how country music artists could better promote understanding and respect for their genre, while challenging cultural prejudices that limited its acceptance in certain circles. For Clint, the airport incident marked a turning point in his understanding of his role as not just an entertainer, but as a cultural ambassador and educator. The experience reinforced his belief that country music artists had a responsibility to defend and promote their genre's cultural legitimacy while remaining open to dialogue and education, rather than responding to criticism with defensiveness or hostility. The incident also strengthened his resolve to continue creating music that authentically reflected his values and artistic vision, regardless of commercial pressures or industry trends that might push him toward more mainstream or pop-influenced sounds. He realized that his responsibility was not just to his own career success, but to the entire country music tradition and the millions of Americans who found meaning and value in that musical heritage. In the weeks and months following the airport confrontation, Clint began incorporating more explicit discussions about country music's cultural significance into his interviews, public appearances, and concert performances. He used these opportunities to educate audiences about the genre's rich history, its sophisticated artistic traditions, and its important role in preserving and expressing authentic American cultural values. He also became more involved in educational initiatives and cultural exchange programs that used music as a bridge between different communities and backgrounds. These projects allowed him to work with educators, cultural organizations, and community groups to promote greater understanding and appreciation for country music while challenging stereotypes and prejudices that prevented people from experiencing the genre's artistic and cultural richness. The transformation in Clint's approach to his public role was noticed and appreciated by his fellow musicians, many of whom began to seek his advice about how to handle difficult situations involving cultural prejudice and personal attacks. He became known not just for his musical abilities, but for his wisdom and guidance about the deeper meaning and responsibility that comes with being given artistic gifts and public platforms. The executives from the airport incident remained in contact with Clint for several years following their encounter, with several becoming genuine supporters of country music and using their influence in the business world to promote greater understanding and respect for American cultural diversity. The lead executive eventually became a patron of music education programs and used his wealth and connections to support emerging country music artists who might not otherwise have access to professional development opportunities and industry connections. This executive's transformation was particularly remarkable because it demonstrated the potential for genuine change and growth when people are confronted with their prejudices in a respectful and educational manner. His journey from cultural critic to cultural supporter became its own inspiring story within the broader narrative of the airport incident, showing how individual encounters could create ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate participants. The story of the airport lounge confrontation became part of country music folklore, joining the ranks of legendary stories about how great artists had overcome adversity and demonstrated the true meaning of professionalism and artistic integrity in the face of deliberate provocation and public humiliation. It served as a powerful reminder that great character reveals itself not in moments of triumph and success, but in moments of challenge and adversity when people are forced to choose between responding with anger or responding with grace. The incident was frequently cited in academic discussions about cultural prejudice, artistic authenticity, and the role of popular music in American society. Sociology professors used the story as a case study in their courses about cultural conflict and resolution, while music educators incorporated it into their curricula as an example of how artists could serve as cultural ambassadors and bridge builders between different communities. The broader impact of the airport incident extended beyond the country music community to influence discussions about respect, tolerance, and cultural understanding in American society more generally. The story became a touchstone for conversations about how people from different backgrounds could learn to appreciate and respect cultural expressions that might initially seem foreign or unfamiliar to their own experiences and preferences. Several books and academic papers were eventually written that analyzed the incident and its significance as an example of successful conflict resolution and cultural bridge building. These scholarly works examined the psychological and sociological factors that contributed to the success of Clint's approach, identifying specific techniques and principles that could be applied to other situations involving cultural conflict and misunderstanding. The incident also inspired other country music artists to become more proactive in defending their genre and educating the public about its artistic merits and cultural significance. Many began incorporating educational elements into their performances and public appearances, using their platforms to challenge stereotypes and promote greater understanding of country music's role in American cultural history. The Dallas-Fort Worth Airport itself eventually installed a small commemorative plaque in the Admiral's Club Lounge, recognizing the location as the site of a significant moment in American cultural history. The plaque served as a reminder to future travelers about the importance of treating all people with respect and dignity, regardless of their cultural background or artistic preferences. Years later, when asked about the most important moments of his career, Clint would often mention the airport lounge incident, not because it represented his greatest commercial success or artistic achievement, but because it taught him something essential about the power of responding to hostility with education and grace. The experience had shown him that even the most entrenched prejudices could be overcome through patient dialogue and genuine human connection. The story continued to inspire musicians and artists of all kinds who faced their own moments of cultural prejudice and personal attack, reminding them that the most powerful response to ignorance and hatred was often education delivered with dignity and respect. The incident demonstrated that true artistic success was measured not by commercial achievement or critical acclaim, but by the ability to use one's gifts and platform to make the world a more understanding and connected place. The young business traveler who had been inspired to explore country music during the airport incident eventually became a music journalist who specialized in writing about the genre's artistic sophistication and cultural significance. His articles and reviews helped introduce country music to new audiences who might never have considered listening to the genre without his educated and respectful guidance. The retired school teacher who had witnessed the confrontation incorporated the story into her volunteer work with literacy and education programs, using it as an example of how knowledge and understanding could overcome prejudice and fear. Her students, many of whom came from diverse cultural backgrounds, found inspiration in the story's message about the importance of keeping an open mind and showing respect for different forms of artistic expression. The airline staff members who had witnessed the incident continued to share the story with colleagues and trainees as an example of how conflicts could be resolved through dignity and mutual respect rather than anger and retaliation. The incident became part of the company's customer service training materials, helping to create a culture of understanding and patience in dealing with difficult situations. The lounge manager who had been so impressed by Clint's handling of the situation eventually wrote a book about customer service and conflict resolution that featured the airport incident as a central case study. Her book became required reading in several business schools and hospitality management programs, spreading the lessons of the encounter to future generations of business leaders and service professionals. The storm that had originally caused the flight delays became, in retrospect, a crucial element in creating the conditions for this transformative encounter. Without the extended weather delay that forced diverse groups of travelers into close proximity for several hours, the cultural conflicts might never have surfaced, and the opportunity for education and understanding might never have presented itself. This irony was not lost on Clint, who often reflected on how the most challenging and frustrating circumstances could sometimes create unexpected opportunities for growth, learning, and positive change. The airport incident became a metaphor for his approach to life and career challenges, reminding him that difficult situations often contained hidden possibilities for personal and professional development. The incident also reinforced his belief in the fundamental goodness of most people and their capacity for growth and change, when presented with new information and perspectives in a respectful and non-threatening manner. The transformation of the executives who had initially attacked him so viciously demonstrated that even deeply held prejudices could be overcome through patient education and genuine human connection. In the years that followed the airport encounter, Clint became increasingly involved in educational and cultural exchange programs that brought together people from different backgrounds and musical traditions. These initiatives allowed him to continue the work that had begun spontaneously in the airport lounge, creating structured opportunities for dialogue and understanding between communities that might otherwise remain separated by cultural barriers and misunderstanding. The legacy of the airport incident continued to grow and evolve over time, inspiring new generations of artists, educators, and cultural workers who were committed to building bridges between different communities and promoting greater understanding and respect for cultural diversity. The story became a template for how individual actions could contribute to broader social healing, and how responding to prejudice with education rather than anger could create lasting positive change. Most importantly, the airport lounge incident reminded everyone involved that behind every cultural stereotype and prejudice were real human beings with dignity, worth, and valuable contributions to make to the broader American cultural conversation. It demonstrated that true sophistication and cultural refinement lay not in the ability to exclude and criticize, but in the capacity to appreciate diversity and respond to differences with curiosity, respect, and genuine desire to learn and understand. The story of Clint Black's response to being called trash in the airport lounge became more than just an anecdote about one country music artist's grace under pressure. It evolved into a powerful symbol of how individual choices to respond to hatred with education, to prejudice with patience, and to cruelty with kindness could create ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate situation and contributed to the ongoing work of building a more understanding and connected society. The thunderstorm that had raged over Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport that day eventually passed, allowing delayed flights to resume their journeys and stranded passengers to reach their destinations. But the lessons learned and the relationships formed during those hours of forced proximity continued to influence lives and attitudes for years to come, proving that sometimes the most valuable journeys are not the ones we plan, but the unexpected encounters that challenge our assumptions and expand our understanding of the world and the people who share it with us. The immediate aftermath of the incident continued to unfold in remarkable ways as passengers shared their experiences and reflections on what they had witnessed. Many travelers who had been present during the confrontation found themselves fundamentally changed by the experience, with their perspectives on cultural prejudice, artistic expression, and human dignity permanently altered by Clint's demonstration of grace under pressure. A successful corporate lawyer who had been working on his laptop during the incident later wrote a detailed account of the experience for his firm's internal newsletter, using it as an example of how professionals should handle conflicts and difficult situations in their own work environments. His account emphasized the importance of responding to personal attacks and professional criticism with dignity and education rather than anger and retaliation, principles that he began incorporating into his own legal practice and client relationships. This lawyer's transformation was particularly significant because his usual approach to conflict had been aggressive and confrontational, reflecting the adversarial nature of his legal training and professional environment. Witnessing Clint's alternative approach to handling hostility opened his eyes to new possibilities for resolving disputes and building bridges with opposing parties, rather than simply defeating them through superior legal strategy and argumentation. The incident also had a profound impact on several airline employees who had been working in the lounge during the confrontation. A young customer service representative who had been dealing with increasingly frustrated passengers throughout the long delay found herself inspired by Clint's example of patience and grace under pressure. She began applying similar principles in her own interactions with difficult customers, discovering that responding to anger and frustration with empathy and understanding often produced much better results than defensive or bureaucratic responses. This customer service representative eventually became a trainer for the airline, developing workshops and training materials that taught other employees how to handle challenging situations using the principles she had learned from observing Clint's response to the airport incident. Her training programs became models for the entire airline industry, helping to create a culture of customer service that emphasized understanding and problem-solving rather than rigid rule enforcement and defensive positioning. The story of the airport incident also reached the country music education community, where it became a central case study in courses about the cultural significance and artistic legitimacy of the genre. Music educators at universities across the country began using the incident as a teaching tool to help students understand the complex relationships between popular music, cultural identity, and social class in American society. Dr. Margaret Williams, a musicology professor at Vanderbilt University who specialized in country music studies, wrote an extensive academic paper analyzing the airport incident and its broader implications for understanding cultural prejudice and artistic authentication in American society. Her paper, which was published in the Journal of American Music Studies, examined the specific language and rhetorical strategies that Clint had used to defend country music and challenge the cultural assumptions of his attackers. Dr. Williams's analysis identified several key elements that contributed to the effectiveness of Clint's response, including his decision to acknowledge the perspective of his critics before challenging their assumptions, his use of personal narrative to humanize country music artists and their audiences, and his emphasis on education and understanding rather than confrontation and retaliation. Her research became foundational work for other scholars studying the role of popular music in American cultural conflicts and identity formation. The academic attention given to the airport incident helped elevate the discussion about country music's cultural legitimacy and artistic merit beyond the entertainment industry into broader intellectual and cultural conversations. Scholars from various disciplines began examining country music with increased seriousness and respect, leading to new research projects and publications that explored the genre's complex relationships with American history, social class, regional identity, and cultural authenticity. The incident also inspired a documentary filmmaker named David Richardson to create a feature-length film about cultural prejudice and music in American society, using the airport confrontation as the central narrative framework for a broader exploration of how different musical genres were perceived and valued by different segments of American society. His documentary, titled Common Ground: Music and Cultural Understanding in America, premiered at several major film festivals and was eventually broadcast on public television stations across the country. Richardson's documentary featured extensive interviews with Clint, several of the executives who had been involved in the original confrontation, and dozens of other musicians, scholars, and cultural commentators who discussed the broader implications of the airport incident for American cultural life. The film became an important educational resource for schools and universities, helping to promote greater understanding and appreciation for musical diversity and cultural tolerance. The documentary also featured interviews with fans from various musical genres who discussed their own experiences with cultural prejudice and the importance of defending artistic expressions that held personal and cultural significance for them. These interviews revealed that the issues raised by the airport incident extended far beyond country music to affect fans and artists from many different musical traditions who faced similar stereotypes and dismissive attitudes from cultural critics and social elites. One particularly moving segment of the documentary featured interviews with classical music lovers who had faced ridicule for their artistic preferences, jazz enthusiasts who had encountered racial prejudice disguised as musical criticism, and hip-hop fans who had struggled against assumptions about their intelligence and cultural sophistication based on their musical tastes. The film demonstrated that cultural prejudice was a pervasive problem that affected many different communities and artistic traditions. The success of Richardson's documentary led to additional media attention for the airport incident and its broader cultural significance. Major television networks began featuring the story in news segments and talk show discussions about cultural tolerance and artistic respect. The incident became a reference point for broader conversations about how Americans from different backgrounds could learn to appreciate and respect cultural expressions that might initially seem foreign or unfamiliar to their own experiences. The story also reached international audiences, with foreign journalists and cultural commentators using the airport incident as a lens for examining American cultural diversity and the ongoing tensions between different social and economic classes in American society. European music critics who had previously dismissed country music as unsophisticated American folk culture began writing more respectful and informed analyses of the genre's artistic merits and cultural significance. The international attention helped elevate country music's global reputation and contributed to increased interest in American roots music among international audiences. Several European festivals began featuring country music artists more prominently in their programming, and music schools in other countries started offering courses in American country music history and performance techniques. The personal relationships that developed from the airport incident continued to evolve and deepen over the years that followed. The executive, who had initially called Clint trash, became one of his most dedicated supporters and advocates, using his business connections and financial resources to support country music education programs and emerging artists who might not otherwise have access to professional development opportunities. This executive, whose name was Robert Hamilton, eventually established a scholarship fund specifically designed to help young people from rural and working-class backgrounds pursue formal musical education and career development in the country music industry. The Hamilton Country Music Scholarship became one of the most prestigious and well-funded educational programs in the genre, providing not just financial support but mentorship and professional networking opportunities for recipients. Hamilton's transformation from cultural critic to cultural patron became its own inspiring story within the broader narrative of the airport incident, demonstrating the potential for genuine change and growth when people are confronted with their prejudices in a respectful and educational manner. His annual scholarship award ceremonies became major events in the Nashville music community, drawing attention from industry leaders and media outlets who were interested in the ongoing legacy of the airport encounter. The scholarship program also served as a model for other philanthropic initiatives that sought to bridge cultural and economic divides through arts education and support. Business leaders from various industries began establishing similar programs to support young artists from underrepresented communities, creating a network of educational opportunities that might never have existed without the inspiration provided by the airport incident and its aftermath. Clint himself became increasingly involved in these educational initiatives, serving as a mentor and advisor to scholarship recipients and other young artists who were working to establish careers in country music. His role as an educator and cultural ambassador became as important to his legacy as his recording and performing career, with many young musicians crediting his guidance and support as crucial factors in their professional development. The educational work that grew out of the airport incident also led to the establishment of several academic programs and research centers dedicated to studying American popular music and its cultural significance. Universities that had previously ignored or marginalized country music studies began offering comprehensive programs that examined the genre's history, artistic traditions, and cultural impact with the same seriousness and scholarly rigor that had traditionally been reserved for classical music and other supposedly more sophisticated art forms. These academic programs produced a new generation of scholars, critics, and cultural commentators who approached country music and other popular genres with increased knowledge, respect, and analytical sophistication. Their research and publications helped establish country music's legitimacy as a subject worthy of serious intellectual consideration, challenging the cultural hierarchies that had previously dismissed the genre as unworthy of academic attention. The long-term impact of the airport incident extended beyond the music industry to influence broader conversations about cultural respect, artistic authenticity, and the role of education in overcoming prejudice and misunderstanding. The story became a touchstone for discussions about how individual actions could contribute to larger social movements toward greater tolerance and understanding. Educational institutions at all levels began incorporating the story into their curricula as an example of effective conflict resolution and cultural bridge building. Elementary school teachers used simplified versions of the story to teach children about respect and tolerance, while high school and college instructors used more detailed analyses to explore complex issues of cultural identity, social class, and artistic authenticity. The story's educational value extended beyond formal academic settings to influence training programs in various professional fields. corporate diversity and inclusion programs began using the airport incident as a case study in how to address cultural conflicts and promote understanding between employees from different backgrounds. Healthcare organizations use the story to train medical professionals about the importance of cultural sensitivity and respect in patient care. Law enforcement agencies also found value in the story as a training tool for officers who needed to learn how to de-escalate conflicts and build trust with community members from different cultural backgrounds. The principles demonstrated by Clint's response to the airport confrontation, listening, acknowledging different perspectives, educating rather than attacking, and maintaining dignity under pressure, proved applicable to many different professional and personal situations. The ongoing influence of the airport incident also contributed to changes in how the entertainment industry approached discussions of cultural authenticity and artistic merit. Record labels, radio stations, and music publications began making more conscious efforts to avoid perpetuating cultural stereotypes and to present different musical genres with greater respect and understanding. Music critics and journalists who had previously dismissed country music or other genres based on cultural prejudices began educating themselves about the artistic traditions and cultural significance of the music they were reviewing. This led to more informed and respectful coverage of country music in mainstream media outlets, helping to challenge stereotypes and promote greater appreciation for the genre's artistic merits. The airport incident also influenced the way that country music artists themselves approached their public roles and responsibilities. Many began following Clint's example by becoming more proactive in educating audiences about their genre's cultural significance and artistic sophistication. Artists started incorporating educational elements into their concerts and interviews, using their platforms to challenge stereotypes and promote greater understanding of country music's role in American cultural history. This increased emphasis on education and cultural ambassadorship became a defining characteristic of country music in the late 1990s and beyond, with artists increasingly seeing themselves as guardians and promoters of an important American cultural tradition, rather than simply entertainers seeking commercial success. The story of the airport lounge confrontation continued to resonate with new generations of musicians, fans, and cultural workers who found inspiration in its message about the power of responding to prejudice with education and grace. The incident became a legend that was passed down through the country music community and beyond, serving as a reminder that individual actions could have far-reaching consequences, and that the choice to respond to hatred with understanding could create positive change that extended far beyond the immediate situation. As years passed and the story continued to be retold and analyzed, it became clear that the airport incident represented more than just one man's graceful response to personal attack. It had become a symbol of the ongoing struggle for cultural understanding and respect in American society, and a testament to the power of music to bridge differences and bring people together across lines of class, education, and regional identity. The thunderstorm that had created the conditions for the encounter was long forgotten, but the lessons learned during those hours of forced proximity continued to influence lives and attitudes decades later, proving that the most important journeys often begin not with careful planning, but with unexpected encounters that challenge our assumptions and expand our capacity for understanding and compassion.